As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the White House announced on Tuesday that the U.S. is sending a new $300 million arms package to Ukraine. That includes more cluster bombs, which are notorious for killing and maiming civilians. So you might be wondering, where did they get the money from for this? I just covered a story yesterday that the Pentagon is saying they need $10 billion to replenish weapons that they've already sent to Ukraine. Congress has not authorized new spending on this proxy war, yet they came up with this money. And U.S. officials are claiming that this is being paid for with savings in the U.S. Army budget. They saved on some contracts, and they're saying that's what's paying for this. And this is the first U.S. arms package to be announced since December 27th, so the first one of this year. So White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan announced the package and said it was, quote, assistance that Ukraine desperately needs to hold the line against Russian attacks and to push back against the continuing Russian onslaught in the East and other parts of Ukraine, end quote. Sorry, he said in the East twice, I guess. So Sullivan also pleaded for Congress to approve the $60 billion President Biden is seeking to fuel the proxy war for another year. Sullivan said, quote, we have said repeatedly here in the briefing room, and President Biden said it to the entire nation, that we cannot provide ongoing assistance to Ukraine without significantly impacting our military readiness, absent congressional action, end quote. So it's interesting he's saying that they can't provide assistance to Ukraine without impacting U.S. military readiness as he's announcing this new weapons package. So I thought it was important. The reason why I made the headlines about the cluster bombs was because they're actually sending two different types of cluster bombs now. And it's kind of become normalized, I guess, that the U.S. has been arming Ukraine with cluster bombs. I still think it's a very, very big deal. So the package includes, and this is what the Pentagon publicly announced, it includes a cluster bomb variant of the 155 millimeter artillery shells known as the dual purpose improved conventional munitions. And the U.S. first began shipping these artillery shells to Ukraine last year. It was a big controversy when it first happened. And again, now the shipments were regular until the U.S. stopped sending the weapons packages at the end of December. And Politico also reported that the new arms package includes a cluster bomb variant of the Army tactical missile systems. And these are known as anti-personnel, anti-material missiles. So the ATACMS, these are missiles that Ukraine has been seeking for a while. They've been asking for the newer, more advanced version that can hit targets up to 190 miles away. This version is an older cluster bomb version that has a range of about 100 miles, and the U.S. started sending these to Ukraine last year as well, secretly. They didn't announce it at first when they first sent them, but eventually admitted it. So this was not publicly announced by the Pentagon, but Politico cited U.S. officials who said they were also sending these cluster bombs. So these are long-range cluster bombs with a 100-mile range that they're sending to Ukraine. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And 4 U.S. Army vessels carrying about 100 troops departed Virginia on Tuesday with equipment to build a temporary port on Gaza's coast. So the idea of this port, according to Biden and other U.S. officials, is to get more aid into Gaza, where the entire population is facing food shortages and children are starving to death. President Biden is taking the extreme measure instead of pressuring Israel to allow more aid into the Strip by cutting military assistance. So according to a report from the Jerusalem Post, this idea to build a port was actually Netanyahu's idea. That's where this initially came from. This report said that Netanyahu proposed the idea to Cyprus's president in October, and under the U.S. plan, the aid will go through Cyprus, and it will also be subject to Israeli inspection, which means it could be turned away. And the port is not expected to be completed for 60 days, and that's 2 months. That's a long time, and many Palestinians could starve to death in that time. A total of 1,000 U.S. troops will be deployed to build the pier, which puts them at risk of being targeted by Hamas. Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry has agreed to resign after the U.S. had a little chat with him. That's the way these things seem to go. So Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry has announced that he will step down and make way for a transitional government nearly 2 years after assuming power in the wake of the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. The move comes as the Caribbean nation is gripped by violent unrest, with armed groups seizing areas of the capital city and clashing with local security forces. So Henry announced this in Puerto Rico, where he has been stranded for days due to the chaos in Port-au-Prince. And things really escalated when he was over in Kenya trying to get this intervention force to support his government, which was not elected. He assumed power. The U.S. backed him. But since he's lost his grip, the U.S. said, all right, enough of you. We want to, I think they have some other people in mind for the next government. But this intervention force that the U.S. is backing, and they pledged another $100 million for it, so that's $200 million that the U.S. is pledging for this intervention in Haiti. I think the plan was just a few thousand Kenyan police. I don't know how that's really going to get things under control. And of course, we're seeing a lot of kind of propaganda about Haiti, which seems to be aimed at convincing people that they need intervention again. But even with all the violence in Haiti, when you see media outlets that actually talk to people in Haiti, that most people say. The general consensus is no Western intervention. There's a very dark history of U.S. intervention, involvements in coups and everything, and they don't want that.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
This is from today's Wall Street Journal. U.S. boosts global role as arms exporter. Isn't that nice? How arms exporter? Who the fuck you talking to? Who are you talking to? Things to kill people with. Bombs, missiles, guns, arms. They shove my arm up your ass. Oh, by the way, I'm hated for speaking about peace. Matter of fact, I'm threatened to be killed for speaking about peace. Oh, I only launched Occupy Peace over a decade ago. I was doing InfoWars on Monday. And I read, peace times are over. EU states PM. Europe's peaceful era has ended. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said, the times for peace are over. The post-war era is over. We are living in new times, the pre-war era. And I said, who the hell is this guy to say this shit? Who the hell is he to say it? They keep ramping it up. This guy Stoltenberg, who's the NATO general, Secretary General, he said last month that the U.S.-led alliance should brace for, quote, a confrontation that could last for decades. These fuckfaces are taking us to war. And the same, I can't call him a prick, this Stoltenberg, a little arrogant fuck of nothing, he rejects the Pope's white flag for Ukraine to appeal for peace. Quote, it's not the time to talk about surrender to Ukrainians by the Ukrainians. That will be a tragedy for the Ukrainians. It will also be dangerous for all of us. Who the fuck are you talking about, all of us? This has been going on between Russia and Ukraine for what, how many hundreds of years? Who are you bullshitting? So going back to the markets. Yeah, the markets went up today, gold went down. The bet's still on the street that they're going to be lowering interest rates. And we're saying they're going to, definitely going to. They're going to lower them in Canada. They're going to lower them in Europe. They're going to lower them in the U.S. in the months to come. They're going to boost up the economy. The economy is going down. The inflation data came in. We're in dragflation. When you look at the real inflation data, it's double from what they're saying. You go to John Williams' shadow stats and you can see the facts. Oh, the housing prices in America, they're around $400,000. No, we're not going to include that. Oh, steak prices. No, the people are eating differently. We're changing it. So when you're looking at, we're in dragflation. You have a recession in the UK. You have a recession in Germany. The third largest economy in the world, the largest in Europe. This is dragflation, not stagflation. It's not stagnant. The economy is going to go down and inflation keeps going up. They say the numbers come. Yeah, the prices of houses haven't gone down. They've gone up. The house prices of cars haven't gone down. They've gone up. The prices of insurance haven't gone down. They've gone up. So this is serious. And no one's talking about the banks go bust crisis. They're mentioning it in little pieces and here and there. So this is very serious. So in your Trends Journal this week, we have, of course, the economic update, layoffs on the rise. This is our 75th week. 75th week of putting all the layoffs going on. Oh, and you know what the news came out today? IBM is going to be firing more people in the coming months. And you know why? AI, we own you. And these numbers that are inflated stock prices. Because when you look at all the people, it's like 204 high-tech firms, fired people since the beginning of this year. So when you're looking at the numbers, they're inflated. They're not real because they're firing people. So the stock prices are going up because they're making more money because they got less people. So it's very important to watch. We are on a crisis edge over here. The U.S. trade deficit went up. Yeah, more than expected. No kidding. And then trends on the global economic front. When the economy fails, jobs go with it. All our going out of business trends. And by the way, the richest countries in the world are hitting high debt levels. It's at now, you ready? $56 trillion.
Here's a little secret that supporters of the monster state never want you to learn about. Partnerships don't work when half the team quits. And that's really getting into a big picture overview of the strategy that we use from the founding generation. Stop participating and stop complying. And the first report I want to cover today comes from Kansas, where a House committee held a hearing on a bill that would prohibit state and local enforcement of most federal gun control on the books, past, present, and whatever they decide to throw at us in the future. Titled, and this is from Mike Meharry's report from a couple of days ago, titled the Kansas Gun Rights Preservation Act. The bill would prohibit an agency of the state, a political subdivision of the state, and their employees from knowingly and willingly participating in any way in the enforcement of any federal act, law, executive order, administrative order, rule, or regulation regarding a firearm, firearm accessory, or ammunition against a law-abiding citizen. I hate the term law-abiding citizen because, well, there's too many laws on the books, and it's pretty easy to point out that most citizens are not law-abiding because of all these superfluous, unconstitutional laws. But what they did do in this legislation, House Bill 2803, was they defined law-abiding citizen as an individual who was not otherwise precluded under state law from possessing a firearm. So no federal rules would apply whatsoever. Well, they're not saying that they won't apply. They're just saying we're not going to help you. On a signature or veto from the governor of Wyoming on Senate file or Senate Bill 109. This is the Prohibit Red Flag Gun Seizure Act. This is taking the same process that they're looking at least considering that they had a committee hearing on it, which is an important first step in the process. And there were a lot of people who testified in support. Of course, all the opposition really came from law enforcement groups. Mike Meharry covers that in his report. All the law enforcement lobby groups, they always are against anything that restricts their ability to work with the federal government because the feds throw them so much cash to help them out with federal gun control, the drug war, civil asset forfeiture, all kinds of surveillance, etc. Because they feed all this information to the feds. They do all this work. So the Prohibit Red Flag Gun Seizure Act takes the same approach as that Kansas legislation, just on something very narrow. When Wyoming has tried to go broad on this, and you would think Wyoming would be really good on this, well, their legislature is absolute garbage. They are 100% thin blue line. So when the cops say, well, this is going to harm our relationship with our federal partners, what they do is they water down the legislation so they can continue working with their federal partners, which they shouldn't be doing if they're following their oath of office. And this was on, it looks like Monday. The Idaho Senate passed a bill, according to Mike Meharry, that would create a process for the state to hold a portion of its reserves in physical gold and silver. This is Senate Bill 1314, which passed on March 11th by a vote of 25-9 out of the state Senate. The bill's statement of purpose notes that holding a portion of state funds in physical gold and silver would, quote, help secure state assets against the risks of inflation and financial turmoil and or to achieve capital gains as measured in Federal Reserve notes. So they're actually in legislation that moved out of the Idaho Senate just this week. They're specifically saying that the Federal Reserve is, well, inflating. They're increasing the money supply and therefore reducing the value of the dollar. And this is a way to hedge against that. Now, this can also help achieve a little bit of financial independence in the case of bigger problems that might be on our way. Now, Tennessee was the first state to pass legislation like this last year. This is an expansion, or I think an improvement in Idaho. And then in Utah, House Bill 348, which I've covered a couple of times on the show, is actually sitting on the governor's desk. It would allow the state treasurer to invest up to 10% of certain state funds into silver, gold, platinum, copper, or palladium. And Mike Meharry describes it like this. Holding gold and silver will allow the state, whether it's Utah or Idaho or Tennessee, to shield its assets and hedge against rapidly depreciating Federal Reserve notes, fiat trash. Well, he didn't put that in a report. He's a professional. Holding gold and silver in reserve would also create a pathway for Utah or whatever other state to maintain financial independence should the U.S. dollar collapse, a very real possibility as the world moves away from the greenback as its reserve currency. I know a lot of supporters of the show are also fans of BTC, for example, and they always ask us, well, why not do that? Well, I think if you support that, you definitely want to contact your state legislator and say, hey, here's another option for us to move away from the Federal Reserve notes and maybe put a portion of state funds into this. The more that states can do this, the more we'll see them be resilient against the financial turmoil caused by the central bank. So not only do the feds ban the transportation of raw milk across state lines, but they also claim the authority to ban raw milk within the borders of the state. There is nothing whatsoever that authorizes the federal government to ban the sale, production, or ownership of any product within state borders. That is only up to the people of each state. And here, from the FDA, it is well within our authority to institute an intrastate ban on unpasteurized milk as well. That's what they wrote in response to a Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund lawsuit against the interstate ban. I'm not sure whatever went down with that lawsuit. But anyways, by a vote of 95-1, the West Virginia House on Monday gave final approval to this bill, House Bill 4911, to legalize raw milk sales in the state with no restrictions or limits. They currently have very limited raw milk sales allowed in West Virginia in what's called kind of herd sharing agreements. Basically, you have to own part of a cow and you have to go there and pick it up, and it makes it very inconvenient. Surprisingly enough, if I want to purchase raw milk or raw cheese or whatever here in Southern California, I can find that all over the place. It's easy. I can find it in major grocery stores, not in a Whole Foods Amazon store, but a lot of other major stores and chains actually carry it. But in a place like West Virginia or Wisconsin, the dairy lobby is very, very powerful, and they don't like competition. But anyway, so they currently have very limited sales allowed, but this would expand it to full retail raw milk sales in the state with no restrictions or limits at all. No amounts, no where you can purchase. Anyone who wants to buy or sell can. All they have to do, the only restriction they have, is to label it very clearly as what it is.
And Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about your new book that is out now, and you'd like to talk about it. Tell us.
Well, I thought it was an opportune moment because we are approaching now the 4-year anniversary of 15 Days to Slow the Spread. So that seemed as good a time as any to talk about it. And, just the other day I was saying there have been 3 incidents in the 21st century in which we've heard people say, I wouldn't want to be a libertarian right about now. Yeah. And the first one was 9/11. The second one was the economic downturn in 2008. And the third one was COVID. You wouldn't want to be a libertarian during a pandemic. And yet, in retrospect, I would want to be a libertarian during all of these. The libertarian response to all of these was optimal, was far better than the actual response that we got. And so the purpose of my Diary of a Psychosis is to reach those people who are reachable. There are some people, if they're wearing a mask in an airport today, who are just not reachable. Yeah. But there are some, and we still have literally billions of people around the world who think that the public health establishment in the various countries did their best under trying circumstances, and they saved a lot of lives, and yeah, it was inconvenient, but they did the best they could. There are a lot of people who still think that. And Diary of a Psychosis is a merciless, ceaseless attack with a sledgehammer on this argument, because the point of it is none of it did any good. And I know that a lot of our people, and I love our people, have been around them my whole life, want to start this story on chapter 37 and start by telling everybody about all the sinister forces running the world. And I totally understand and am sympathetic to that, but most people right now need to start at chapter 1. And chapter 1 is none of the stuff they did to us did any good, and it did a huge amount of harm.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Here's what the cover of the book looks like. I cringe when I hear the word COVID now, but what your book does, it's very different. And now, if you don't mind, just explain why it is so different.
Well, there are other books on COVID, and I like some of them. But mine is not like I have a chapter on lockdowns and a chapter on masks. Mine really is like a diary where we're walking through as these things are happening. And because I was recording this stuff as it was happening, I remember all those little details that a lot of people may have forgotten. Like I remember Alachua County, not too far from where I live in Florida. They established some rule of you could have one person in your retail establishment per 1,000 square feet. And the board or whoever was in charge was asked, well, how did you come up with that figure? I mean, what scientific principles were behind that? And they said, well, we thought 1 per 1,000 was easy math for everybody to do. So that's just a little detail, but I remember all those. And you put all those together, it reproduces what it was like. And I feel like we need this for a couple of reasons. First of all, we need our kids to understand what we endured, because it's hard to explain it to them. They have to actually be able to experience it. But the other thing is, I have people telling me, you should just forget this and move on. But I feel like, when has that ever worked? Oh, just forget this outrage by the government and just move on. Could you imagine Thomas Jefferson saying, the government completely ruined your life, but just forget it. These things happen.
They had no idea what was going on, but they had a very good idea of what you should do, which is
yes, right.
That's it. Well, at the time you were doing this, Dr. Paul and I were following your work very closely, because I almost felt like we developed a sense of community among the people that got it. And I have to admit, the people who I respected who didn't get it, who went on the other side, and I won't name them, but I've lost respect for them that I'll never gain back again, no matter what they've done. Subsequently, even things that I agree with them on. If you get this wrong, I just don't want to have anything to do with you. I hate to say it, I just feel honestly, but we felt when you were doing this separately, and we actually did a conference once with Mises where we were all talking about it, I think in 2020. But just having you put these together because you have such a great rhetorical flair. I mean, you have a great way of presenting facts in a way. But just having you as an ally when we did the show every day was so helpful.
But you know, and pointing out as Tom has about all the dumb things and all the rules and regulations and it all being wrong. But we haven't said a whole lot about the real evil. And that is, this is authoritarian, this is a mandate, and if you don't listen, by golly, you're going to be punished. And they punished a lot of people, and there's been a lot of people who suffered medical diseases. But do you think somebody's going to have liability for the people who have died from this? So that also is the big issue, and the families who have suffered from this, you know, realize this. But people have, you know, the more you followed your conscience and good economic policies and good medical policies, more likely is that you would have suffered more than anybody wants to look at.
Well, I will say, and I'm saying this not just because his dad is on the screen with me, but I will say that Senator Rand Paul did a fantastic job through all this, as did the gentleman we were talking about earlier, Thomas Massey. And both of them came out of the Ron Paul revolution. I mean, one of them came right out of the Ron Paul household. But what impressed me about this is that I feel like if we had had a President Romney would have told us that we need to follow what Fauci says, and he would have continued that for 4 years, and the Republican Party, you know, would have gone along. If this had been 2012, let's say. But something had changed by 2024, that there were enough right-of-center people who were willing to say, call me all the names you want, but I do not accept these so-called experts you've trotted out. I think for a long time, Republicans and people on the right, they're so desperate to look respectable that they wouldn't have dared stand up to an Anthony Fauci. And to see how many commentators did and openly ridiculed the public health establishment is extremely refreshing.
Yeah, I would say Senator Paul will go down in history because he is the guy who dethroned Fauci. I mean, he slashed him up like a slasher movie, and it was beautiful to see.